Hey, welcome or welcome back. If you were a kid in the 90s, you know that Star Wars was in a weird place. The original movies were old enough to be considered classic history, and the prequels didn't show up until the very end of the decade. So for an entire generation, the way we experienced the galaxy far, far away wasn't on the movie screen. It was on flickering monitors and through hums and farts of our CD-ROM drives. Today, we are covering every single major Star Wars game released on PC in the 1990s, so strap in and let's jump to hyperspace. Let's kick things off in 1993 with the grandfather of space simulations, Star Wars X-Wing. X-Wing wasn't just a game about random dogfights, it was a full-fledged military campaign woven into the movie timeline. You play as Kayan Farlander, a pilot for the Rebel Alliance. The story is split into 3 massive tours of duty. First, you're dealing with a new Imperial threat in the New Hope prologue, actively engaging in political disruption and hitting Imperial convoys. Then things get a bit more serious and you participate in the Great Search, scrambling to locate the plans for the Death Star, essentially playing out the moments that led to Princess Leia's capture. Finally, the game culminates in the Battle of Yavin. But unlike the movie, where Luke gets all the credit, you have to survive the initial assault, protect the bombers, and yes, eventually take the shot on Death Star's exhaust port yourself. And doing so made you feel like an unsung hero of the rebellion. To surprise of absolutely no one who played the game, Star Wars X-Wing was a massive hit. LucasArts shipped 100,000 units for launch, and in the 90s that was nothing to scoff at. And all of them sold out in a single weekend. It's worth noting, however, that the game was notoriously difficult. If you managed to beat the Death Star trench run without cheating, you earned legitimate playground bragging rights among your buddies, as it was clear that Force was indeed strong in you. Later the same year, we got something completely different but nearly equally as fantastic, Star Wars Rebel Assault. In Rebel Assault you take the role of the Rookie One, a farmer from Tatooine, I know, very original, who dreams of being a space pilot. But shallowness of the setup aside, the game is actually really good. The story takes you on a greatest hits tour of the Star Wars universe. You start by training in Beggar's Canyon weaving through racks. Once you graduate, however, the plot goes off the rail in the best possible way. You single-handedly assault a Star Destroyer, the Devastator, and then blow it up. Now how cool is that? Then you defend the Rebel base on Hoth, even if it isn't really in the correct Star Wars timeline order, and finally, you end up in the cockpit of an X-Wing for the Death Star assault. And once again, it's not Luke Skywalker who's the hero, it's you who saves the day, or the universe. Potato tomato. Rebel Assault released in the full motion video age, so naturally, jumping on that also popular multimedia horse of the era, it was an on-rail shooter. Meaning that you didn't fly the ship, it kinda flew itself and you just moved the crosshair spreading death and destruction all around. Interestingly enough, Rebel Assault for a short while at least became this killer app for the new and emerging CD-ROM tech, selling over 110,000 copies in only one day. If you loved X-Wing we've just spoken about, you had a fantastic 1994, because LucasArts dropped what many still consider the greatest space combat game ever made, Star Wars TIE Fighter. TIE Fighter is where the storytelling matured. You play as a Marik Steel, an Imperial pilot. And while you may think that playing as the so-called baddies was the wrong call on LucasArts' side, that was actually the game's brilliance, because you weren't evil. In your eyes, you were bringing order to a chaotic galaxy plagued by pirates and terrorists, the latter naturally being the rebels. The plot is thick with political intrigue. Initially you're just hunting pirates and ending civil wars, but soon you uncover a plot by traitorous Imperial admiral named Kharkov who is selling tech to the rebels. As you rise through the ranks, you catch the eye of the Emperor's Secret Order and eventually end up working alongside Grand Admiral Thrawn and Darth Vader to stop a massive coup attempted by a rogue Admiral Zerine. What's more, you actually save the Emperor's life, so you're sort of a dick responsible for the Imperial reign. TIE Fighter took everything X-Wing did and made it better. The missions were complex and the secret objectives added a lot of replayability, extending the life of the game considerably. Oh, and this may be an interesting tidbit for you, but critically, this is historically the highest rated game on this list. PC Gamer gave it a 96% and Computer Gaming World a perfect 100. Not that we care what traditional media say. When 1995 arrived, Doom craze was in full swing and effectively it had taken over the entire gaming world. LucasArts didn't rest on their laurels though, and decided to drop their bomb of a game, Star Wars Dark Forces, which to this day is my favorite game inspired by the movies. Dark Forces introduced us to Kyle Katarn, a gritty mercenary who shoots first and asks questions never. Which, truth be told, was each and every one of us in all of those early FPS games. On the other hand, what can you really ask the corpse? Is the grunt sufficiently cushioned? Or maybe if the killer shot was not very painful? Anyway, the game opens with a bang. Kyle is the one who actually steals the Death Star plans from the base on Danuta, setting up the events for A New Hope. But the main meat of the story actually happens after the Death Star explodes. The Empire, led by the cyborg General Rom Mock, starts producing Dark Troopers, massive robotic soldiers that can easily wipe out entire rebel bases. So Kyle, whom you play as you hero of mine, has to planet hop across the galaxy investigating the supply chain, infiltrating Jabba Hutt's yak, and eventually sneaking onto the Ark Hammer, a massive spacefaring factory ship, to kill Mock and shut the project down. While many called Dark Forces a mere Doom clone, it was much more. Its Jedi engine allowed for looking up and down, jumping and multi-floor maps, so tech that Doom didn't have at all. Being as great as it was, Dark Forces was naturally a juggernaut success, selling nearly 1 million copies in the US alone by the end of the decade. Believe it or not, but better do as it's a fact, but in 1995 there was a second Star Wars game, Rebel Assault 2: The Hidden Empire. The sequel picks up with Rookie One investigating a distress call in Drayton Nebula, a place famous for ships disappearing. You know, a Bermuda Triangle of Star Wars universe. Rookie One discovers that the Empire has been operating a secret mining facility to mass-produce a new terror, the TIE Phantom. A fighter that, totally in opposition to the well-known canon, is capable of using cloaking devices. Sure, it may all sound a bit cheesy given the franchise it relates to, but trust me, it's a pretty good game. Rookie One gets captured, so he naturally has to escape the Imperial facility and does so by stealing a TIE fighter. He then proceeds to infiltrate the Super Star Destroyer, aptly named Terror, and then destroys its cloaking generator from the inside, saving the rebellion from an invisible enemy fleet. Despite being a rather fun, even if a bit unusual game, Rebel Assault 2's biggest claim to fame, other than the Star Wars franchise it heavily leaned on, was that it was the first time since the Return of the Jedi that Lucasfilm shot new live-action Star Wars footage. They even used actual props and costumes from the movies. "1997 may have only brought us one Star Wars game, but boy oh boy, was it a banger! Star Wars X-Wing vs TIE Fighter. Okay, so at launch, the plot for X-Wing vs TIE Fighter was basically non-existent. It was just a bare-bones multiplayer simulator, a fun simulator, no doubt about that, but rather dry one too. LucasArts, however, soon realized people wanted a story, so they released the Balance of Power campaign, fixing the previous mistake. And the story that it offers focuses on a specific conflict in the ARAM sector. The Empire is trying to crush a rebel stronghold to secure shipping lanes, while the rebellion is desperately fighting to evacuate their bases and keep their supply lines open. It wasn't a grand save the galaxy narrative we've grown used to, but it was a dark, gritty war of attrition. A new experience perhaps, but definitely a good one. You could play the campaign from both sides, either enforcing the blockade as the Empire or running the gauntlet as the rebels. So you know, fun and fun. "1997 was a time of change. The internet was becoming the next big thing and the gamers wanted to shoot their friends rather than poor AI grunts, and X-Wing vs T-Fighter definitely delivered, focusing purely on 8-player LAN parties and dogfighting. What's more, it was also the first game in the series to utilize texture mapping heavily, making the ships look less like geometric shapes and more like, well, ships. Unlike 1997, 1998 was a busy year and we've got two games celebrating the timeless Star Wars saga. First, we have Star Wars Rebellion. Since Rebellion was a grand strategy game and not the story-based one, you were the one to write the plot, with your actions and choices, that is. The game's setup is the period immediately following the destruction of the first Death Star, when the galaxy is in open civil war and the narrative creates a massive game of cat and mouse. If you play the Alliance, your headquarters is hidden and you must gather support from surrounding systems to eventually capture Coruscant and Emperor Palpatine. If you play the Empire, however, then first of all, you're a bad guy. Yeah, you are. And secondly, you must scour the galaxy with probe droids to find the hidden rebel base and capture Mon Mothma and Luke Skywalker. With all of that as your solid plot base, you generate your own stories like Han Solo getting captured on a diplomatic mission or Darth Vader getting injured in a lightsaber duel. Fun stuff. Star Wars Rebellion was polarizing. It was basically Spreadsheets the game, but in Star Wars clothing. The interface was rather clunky and not all fans were ready for such a dramatic change of pace, but for the hardcore tacticians, it was an addiction. It's worth noting too that the Rebellion has an insane encyclopedia built-in of anything Star Wars related, so if we're ever curious about a particular character, location or event in the lore, it most likely has it covered in detail. Also in 1998, we got Star Wars Rogue Squadron 3D, a fun title that was meant to complement the original series. Loosely inspired by the comic books and novels, it fills the gap between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back. You play as Luke Skywalker, leading the newly formed Rogue Squadron. The overarching villain is Moff Cyrdan, who is trying to consolidate power. Everyone in the Empire seems to be gunning for it, so it shouldn't be a surprise. This time, however, you aren't just fighting in space, you are also doing atmospheric missions. So you'll be escorting supplies, rescuing dissidents and protecting the floating cities from Imperial attacks, and more. The story wraps up with a massive showdown against Cyrdan on the volcanic planet. Being as varied as it was, Rogue Squadron 3D really fleshed out the idea that the war was happening everywhere, not just near the Death Star. Star Wars Rogue Squadron 3D was fast, accessible, and it immediately made you feel like a hero the very moment you started it up. It features no complex radar, instrument or dials, just pure arcade blasting, and it was so much fun. Funny enough, it also had a secret code to fly a Buick. Yeah, a 1969 Buick Electra. Why, you may wonder? For shits and giggles. (1999), the end of the decade. And the game we're gonna open it with is the grand finale of the simulation series, Star Wars X-Wing Alliance. X-Wing Alliance took a huge narrative swing, starting with a setup unlike any earlier games. You play as Ace Azamin, the youngest son of a neutral merchant family, and the first act is purely a family drama. You are running cargo and fighting a rival merchant clan, the Viraxo. Eventually, the Empire sides with your rivals, destroys your family's home station and forces you to flee to the rebellion for protection. The personal story of revenge against the Viraxo is woven perfectly into a larger war, adding depth to the narrative. You even end up piloting the Millennium Falcon itself during the Battle of Endor, and yes, you are the one who flies inside the second Death Star to blow up the main reactor. It's the perfect marriage of personal stakes and galactic history and a lot of fun. X-Wing Alliance, in spite of its title, was the first game in the series that also allowed you to operate the turrets in the YT-1300 freighters while the AI flew. It may not seem like a lot, but it's one of the many small changes that cemented Alliance's position as the peak of the classic Star Wars simulation era. The next two games will be from the prequel era, and we're starting with Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, the game. I mean, it's obvious that it is one, but I just really wanted to say it aloud, you know, for the effect. Released a few weeks after the movie in 1999, The Phantom Menace is an action-adventure that follows the film's script almost beat to beat but expands on the action, which, if you think about it, is the right call for a game like that. It also lets you play as 4 different characters from the movie, swapping perspectives constantly and keeping the action going. You start as Obi-Wan Kenobi escaping the Trade Federation ship, then you're Qui-Gon Jinn hacking your way through the swamps of Naboo. You head to Tatooine to explore Mos Espa and deal with Watto and local tax, and eventually play as Queen Amidala fighting to retake her palace. It ends with a dual climax, Captain Panaka fighting in the palace, while Obi-Wan battles Darth Maul in the generator room. And while it may feel wonky at times, I secretly kinda enjoyed the approach to storytelling in this one. The Phantom Menace was low-key infamous for actually letting you be a force-wielding jerk. You could force-push innocent civilians or pick fights with other spacefaring NPCs, which, you know, wouldn't really fly on the light side of the Force. It may have not been a critical darling, but the exploration was cool, especially that you got to spend a bit more time in the areas movie only glimpsed, like the Gungan City or the back alleys of Coruscant. And finally, we end the 90s with a total banger, Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, probably my second favorite Star Wars game, right after the original Dark Forces. While Racer is a racing game, it actually has a career mode too that fleshes out the pod racing circuit. You start as a nobody with a junker pod and you have to race across the galaxy. The goal is to win enough races to get invited to the famous Buntaif Classic on Tatooine. The narrative is told through your progression, buying parts from Watto, unlocking better racers, and finally facing off against the reigning champion, Sebulba. Racer took a seemingly unimportant 10-minute scene from the movie and built an entire sporting culture around it. And holy crap, the devs aced it. Star Wars Episode 1 Racer was a monster of a game. In fact, it still somehow holds the Guinness World Record for the best-selling sci-fi racing game of all time, moving over 3.1 million units worldwide. Other than that, it features fun and easy upgrade system, damageable engines and parts, and a sense of momentum that could rival the best in the genre. You know, all the wipeouts, high octanes and F-Zeros. Bada beep, bada boom, Bob's your uncle, and we've somehow covered all the Star Wars games of the 1990s. A decade that started with polygons and ended with high-speed racing. It was a time when LucasArts could do no wrong and PC gaming often felt like magic. Just a quick note so that you don't destroy me in the comments. I've stuck to pure games today, so I didn't include educational titles like Droid Works or the desktop curiosities like Yoda Stories. Would you like to see this covered too? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, hit those like, sub, share and bell icons below, it helps more than you know. Thanks a lot for watching, take care of yourself and may the Force be with you.